The great hall of the Galactic Assembly stretched wider than any building on Earth. And Ambassador Elena Vasquez felt very small as she walked toward the speaking platform at its center. 12 massive thrones rose in a circle around her, each one carved from materials found only on the homeworlds of the elder species beings who had sailed between stars when humans still lived in caves and hunted with stone tools. The Lorian High Minister sat on a throne of living crystal that pulsed with soft blue light, his silver skin reflecting the glow of 1,000 floating orbs that illuminated the chamber. Beside him, the insectoid Kethra delegation clicked their mandibles in quiet conversation, their compound eyes watching Elena with what she had learned to recognize as amusement. The Torvan representative, a massive creature covered in rocky plates, rumbled something to his aide that made nearby delegates laugh. Elena knew what they thought of humanity, the youngest species ever admitted to the assembly, given observer status only because galactic law required it after a species achieved faster than light travel 200 years among the stars meant nothing to beings whose civilizations had lasted for tens of thousands of years. She reached the platform and waited for the tone that would signal her permission to speak. The tone came high and clear, and silence fell across the great hall. Honored members of the Interstellar Governing Council, Elena began, her voice steady despite the fear that twisted in her stomach. I come before you today with a warning that cannot wait. She pressed a button on her wrist device, and a holographic display burst to life above her head, showing star charts and energy readings that her team had spent months gathering. 3 months ago, Earth's deep space monitoring stations detected unusual energy signatures in the Cygnus void, she continued, pointing to a dark region on the map where no star shone. These signatures match historical records from your own archives, records that describe the approach of what ancient texts call the swarm. The reaction was immediate. The Valorian High Minister leaned forward, his silver face twisting into an expression Elena had never seen before, something between shock and anger. The Kethra stopped their clicking and went completely still. Ambassador Vasquez, the High Minister said, his voice cutting through the murmurs that had erupted across the hall. Do you understand the severity of what you suggest? I do, High Minister, Elena replied. That is why I am here. The swarm, the High Minister continued, rising from his throne, is a legend, a story told to frighten young species into cooperating with their elders. Nothing more. With respect, High Minister. The energy signatures do not lie, Elena said, bringing up more data on the holographic display. Our scientists have analyzed the readings from multiple stations across 17 different systems, and they all point to the same conclusion. Your scientists, the Kethra High Speaker interrupted, her voice a series of clicks translated by the device around her neck. Our children playing with tools they do not understand. Humanity has been among the stars for barely 2 centuries, and you presume to tell us about threats we dismissed as myth before your species learned to make fire? Laughter rippled through the hall. Cruel and dismissive. Elena felt her face grow hot, but she forced herself to remain calm. I am not here to insult the wisdom of this council, she said. I am here because my people have seen something dangerous, and we believe it is our duty to share that information. Whether you choose to believe us is your decision. But I will not stay silent when lives may be at stake. The Torvan representative slammed one massive fist against his throne, the sound echoing like thunder. Enough of this nonsense, he growled. We have heard Earth's warning, and we reject it. The Cygnus void has been empty for longer than your species has existed, and it will remain empty long after your brief civilization has faded into dust. The High Minister raised one slender hand, and silence returned. Ambassador Vasquez, he said, his tone now cold and final. The Council thanks humanity for its concern. But we must be clear, spreading fear about mythical threats is not the behavior of a species that wishes to be taken seriously. He paused, letting his words sink in. You may return to your embassy and inform your government that the matter is closed. We will not discuss it again. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to scream at them that they were making a terrible mistake. But she knew it would change nothing. She bowed stiffly and walked out of the great hall, feeling the weight of 1,000 alien eyes on her back. The human embassy on Vareth Prime was a small building compared to the grand structures of the elder species. But Elena had always found comfort in its simple design. However, the familiar walls felt like a prison. She sat alone in her office, staring at the star charts that the council had refused to consider, wondering if she had done something wrong, if there was some argument she could have made that would have convinced them to listen. A knock at her door made her look up. "Come in," she said. The door slid open, and a tall man in a military uniform stepped inside. Commander Marcus Cole, the embassy's military attaché, a soldier who had served on the front lines of 3 different conflicts before being assigned to this diplomatic post. "I watched the session," he said, his voice low and rough. "They did not even pretend to consider your evidence." "No," Elena admitted. "They did not." Marcus walked to the window and looked out at the alien city beyond, its towers glowing with lights that made the night sky disappear. "I have been reading the old records," he said. "The ones the council claims are just legends, Ambassador. If even half of what those records describe is true, the swarm is not something that can be ignored." Elena nodded slowly. "I know," she said. "But what can we do? We are the youngest species in the galaxy, and they have made it clear that our voice means nothing here." Marcus turned to face her, and there was something hard in his eyes, something that Elena had seen before in soldiers who had made difficult decisions. "Then perhaps it is time to stop asking for permission," he said. "If the Council will not protect the galaxy from what is coming, then humanity must find another way." Elena stared at him for a long moment, understanding what he was suggesting. "That could be considered treason," she said quietly. "So could letting billions die because we were too polite to act," Marcus replied outside the window. The stars burned cold and distant, and somewhere in the darkness between them, something ancient and hungry was moving closer with every passing moment. The Council had made its choice. Now humanity would have to make its own. 6 months had passed since the Council rejected Earth's warning, and the galaxy continued its business as if nothing had changed. Trade ships moved between worlds. Diplomats argued over ancient treaties, and the elder species laughed at the foolish humans who had tried to frighten them with children's stories. But Marcus Cole was not laughing. He stood on the bridge of a small human cargo ship called the Defiant Hope, watching the stars streak past as they traveled toward the outer edges of known space. Behind him, a small crew worked at their stations. 12 humans who had volunteered for a mission that their own government refused to authorize, plus 2 aliens who had their own reasons for being here. "We will reach the Torvan mining colony in 4 hours, reported Lieutenant Sarah Chun from the navigation console. "Are you sure about this, Commander?" "No," Marcus admitted honestly, "but someone has to look. And the Council has made it clear that they will not." A clicking sound came from the corner of the bridge, where a large insectoid figure sat hunched over a data terminal. This was Chitter, a Kethra exile who had been cast out from her hive for challenging the decisions of her superiors. She owed her life to a human captain who had rescued her from a drifting escape pod 3 years ago, and she had insisted on joining Marcus when she heard about his mission. "The energy readings are getting stronger," she reported, her translator giving her clicks a feminine voice. "Whatever is out there, we are getting closer to it." The other alien on the ship stepped forward, Valorian named Kale, whose silver skin had dulled. With age and stress, he had been one of the leading scientists on his homeworld until he made the mistake of agreeing with Earth's analysis of the Cygnus Void. Readings his government had stripped him of his position and declared him mentally unstable. I have been comparing the current readings to the historical records, Kale said, his voice tight with worry. The patterns match exactly. This is not a coincidence or a sensor error. Marcus nodded grimly. Then we need proof that even the Council cannot ignore. 4 hours later, the Defiant Hope dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Torvan mining system, and the bridge fell completely silent. The colony was gone, where sensors showed there should have been a thriving mining operation with over 50,000 workers. There was nothing but stripped rock and floating debris. The planet itself looked wrong, its surface scarred with massive gouges, as if something had simply eaten away entire mountains. By the ancient queens, Chitter whispered, her compound eyes wide with horror. This cannot be real. Kale's silver face had gone pale, and his hands trembled as he pulled up more detailed scans. The colony was fully operational 3 weeks ago, he said. I checked the records before we left. They were shipping ore to 6 different systems. Marcus felt cold fury building in his chest as he stared at the destruction before them. Sarah, launch the recording drones, he ordered. I want every angle of this documented and scanned for any survivors. The scan results came back within minutes. No life signs anywhere in the system. 50,000 Torvan workers had simply vanished, along with their families and all the equipment that had made this colony one of the most productive in the sector. Commander, Sarah said quietly, you need to see this. She transferred an image to the main screen, and Marcus felt his blood run cold. Floating among the debris was a shape unlike anything in the galactic archives. A twisted mass of metal and organic matter, roughly the size of a small shuttle. Covered in sharp edges and pulsing with a faint inner light, it appeared to be dead, probably damaged during the attack. But its very existence confirmed everything that Earth had tried to warn the Council about. The swarm. Cal breathed. It was never just a legend. Marcus turned to his communications officer. Send everything to the Council. Every scan, every image, every piece of data we have collected, send it on all channels with my name attached. And make sure they know that Earth was right. The transmission went out into the void, carrying proof of a horror that the galaxy had refused to believe in. 3 days later, the Defiant Hope returned to Verith Prime, and Marcus presented his evidence to anyone who would listen. The Council's response came within hours. The footage was declared falsified. The data was labeled corrupted. Marcus Cole was officially accused of fabricating evidence to destabilize the galactic government, and human ships were banned from traveling beyond the core systems without special permission. Ambassador Elena Vasquez was quietly asked to resign her position and return to Earth. When she came to say goodbye to Marcus, her eyes were red from crying, but her voice was steady. They would rather let the galaxy burn than admit we were right, she said. I know, Marcus replied. But the people on this station saw what we brought back. The dock workers, the maintenance crews, the merchants who helped us refuel. He looked out the window at the busy spaceport below. The Council can lie to itself, but it cannot silence everyone. Word will spread, and when the swarm comes closer, people will remember that humanity tried to warn them. Elena shook her head slowly. Will that be enough? No, Marcus admitted, but it is all we have for now. That night, reports came in from 3 more colonies on the outer rim. Communications lost, ships vanishing, entire populations going silent. The Council blamed pirates and equipment failures, but in the bars and markets of 100 different worlds, beings of every species began to whisper about the strange footage that had come from a human ship, and about the young species that had tried to warn them about something terrible coming from the darkness between the stars. Fear was spreading. even if the Council refused to acknowledge it, and somewhere out in the Cygnus void, the swarm continued its advance, consuming everything in its path. Growing stronger with every world it devoured, time was running out for the galaxy, and humanity could only watch and wait for the moment when the truth would become impossible to deny. Marcus stood alone in his quarters that night, studying the images of the destroyed colony over and over again. He had done everything he could through proper channels, and it had not been enough. If the galaxy was going to survive what was coming, someone would have to take actions that no government would approve. Someone would have to be ready to fight when the time came. Regardless of what the Council said, Marcus Cole had spent his entire career following orders. Now he began to plan for the day when following orders would no longer be an option. The first Kethra hive world fell on a Tuesday by Earth's calendar, and the galaxy finally understood that the nightmare was real. 3 billion insectoid beings lived on Kethra Prime, the heart of their ancient civilization, and in less than a week every single one of them was dead. The swarm did not invade like an army or attack like a fleet. It descended like a plague of locusts made from metal and flesh. Billions of creatures ranging from the size of a fist to the size of a building, all moving with a single terrible purpose. They consumed everything: metal, rock, water, organic matter. Nothing was left behind except bare stone, stripped of every useful molecule. The refugees who escaped on the few ships fast enough to outrun the swarm told stories that made hardened soldiers weep, mothers watching their children dissolve into clouds of hungry machine soldiers firing weapons that did nothing against enemies, that simply absorbed their bullets and kept coming. Cities that had stood for 10,000 years reduced to dust in hours. 2 more Kethra worlds fell in the following weeks, and suddenly the Council could no longer pretend that nothing was wrong. Emergency sessions were called, but instead of unity, the Great Hall filled with blame and anger. The Valorians accused the Kethra of hiding the threat to protect their trade routes. The Torvan demanded that Kethra space be abandoned entirely to slow the swarm's advance. The Kethra High Speaker, her voice breaking with grief for her lost people, begged for military assistance that no one seemed willing to provide, and through it all, Earth's warnings were never mentioned. To acknowledge them now would mean admitting that the Council had allowed billions to die through pride and stubbornness. Marcus Cole watched the chaos from the observation gallery above the Great Hall, his fists clenched at his sides. "They are still fighting each other," Cale said beside him. The Valorian scientist's face twisted with disgust at his own people. Even now, with the enemy at their door, they cannot stop thinking about politics. "Then we will have to show them another way," Marcus replied. He turned and walked out of the gallery, his mind already working on the plan that had been forming for months. The next day, something unexpected happened. The fleet of human cargo ships, over 200 vessels, that had been quietly gathering at the edge of Kethra space, jumped into the refugee zone and began broadcasting on all channels. "This is Commander Marcus Cole of Earth," the message said. "We are here to help. Any being seeking evacuation should proceed to the following coordinates. No payment required. No questions asked." The response was overwhelming. Theia survivors flooded toward the human ships, desperate beings who had lost everything and expected nothing from the species that the Council had mocked and dismissed. But the humans took them in anyway. Cargo bays were converted into temporary shelters. Food supplies meant for human colonists were distributed to hungry refugees. Medical teams worked around the clock to treat the wounded, learning Kethra biology on the fly, because no one else had bothered to help them prepare. Within a week, the human fleet had evacuated over 2 million Kethra survivors to safe worlds. In the core systems, the Council demanded to know where Earth had found the resources for such an operation. The answer was simple: humanity had been preparing For this moment ever since the Council rejected their warning. Diverting ships and supplies in secret, building a network of volunteers who were ready to act when the time came. We could not make you listen, Elena Vasquez said in a recorded message sent to every news outlet in the galaxy. So we decided to act instead. This is who humans are. And this is what we do when people need help. The message spread faster than any official announcement had ever traveled on 100 worlds. Beings who had never thought twice about the young human species watched footage of their cargo ships rescuing refugees. And something began to change meanwhile. Marcus Cole was not content with evacuation alone. He gathered a force of human volunteers, soldiers, pilots, engineers, anyone willing to fight, and began launching hit-and-run attacks against the edges of the swarm. They could not stop the advance, but they could slow it down. They could buy time for evacuation ships to escape. They could learn how the enemy moved and fought. The casualties were terrible human. Ships were not built for war against an enemy like this. And for every swarm creature they destroyed, 100 more seemed to take its place. Marcus watched good people die every day, friends and strangers alike. All of them knowing that they probably would not survive, but fighting anyway. Why do you do this? Chitter asked him one night, after a battle that had cost them 3 ships and 47 lives. The Council still calls you criminals. Your own government has not officially approved your actions. Why do you keep fighting for people who never wanted your help? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the stars. Because someone has to, he finally said. Because those refugees did not choose to be attacked. And they do not deserve to die just because their leaders made bad decisions. He turned to face the Kethra exile, and there was a fire in his eyes that she had never seen before. My people have a saying, the right thing is still right. Even when it is hard, even when no one thanks you for it, even when it costs you everything. Chitta clicked her mandibles softly, a sound that her translator rendered as something close to wonder. Vethkai, she said, using a word from the ancient Kethra language that had not been spoken in generations. It means those who stand in fire for strangers. I thought it was just a myth. A story about heroes who never really existed. She bowed her head toward Marcus. But here you are, word of the human. Resistance spread through the refugee camps. And into the wider galaxy, the elder species had fleets and technology and thousands of years of experience. But they hid behind their borders and argued about treaties. The humans had almost nothing compared to them. But they were out there fighting and dying for people they had never met. For the first time in galactic history, beings began to look at humanity not as children to be dismissed, but as something else entirely, something that the ancient civilizations had forgotten how to be, something brave. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was supposed to determine the fate of civilization, but it had dissolved into chaos before the first hour was finished. The swarm had broken through the outer defenses and was now approaching Vareth Prime itself within one planetary cycle. The seat of galactic government would be under attack, and no one could agree on what to do about it. Valorian High Minister demanded that all fleets retreat to protect their individual homeworlds. Torvan, representative, argued for a massive counterattack that military advisors said would fail. The Kethra delegation sat in silence, too broken by grief to participate in debates that seemed meaningless. Now accusations flew back and forth across the Great Hall. Old grudges and ancient feuds suddenly more important than the enemy approaching their doorstep. This is your fault, the Torvan representative bellowed at the Valorians. Your arrogance prevented us from preparing. Our arrogance? The High Minister shot back. It was the Kethra who controlled the border sectors. They should have seen this coming. We tried to warn you. The Kethra High Speaker screamed, finally breaking her silence. We begged for help, and you told us we were overreacting. The The noise in the hall grew louder and louder until no one could hear anything at all. And then the main doors exploded inward. Marcus Cole walked through the smoke and debris, his uniform torn and stained with blood from wounds that had not fully healed. Behind him came Chitter, Kale, and a group of human soldiers who looked like they had just walked out of a war zone, because they had security forces moved to intercept them. But the Kethra delegation rose as one and blocked their path. "Let him speak," the High Speaker said, a voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "This human has done more for my people in 3 months than this council has done in 3 centuries. The Torvon delegation exchanged glances, and then they too stood in support. Other species followed, not many, but enough to make the security forces hesitate. The High Minister's silver face twisted with anger. "Commander Cole, you are a wanted criminal who's been conducting unauthorized military operations in violation of galactic law. You have no right to be here." Marcus limped forward until he stood in the center of the great hall, exactly where Elena Vasquez had stood when she delivered her warning so many months ago. "You are correct, High Minister," he said, his voice rough but steady. "I am a criminal by your laws. I have broken your rules, ignored your orders, and done everything you told humanity not to do." He looked around the hall at the 12 great thrones and the beings who sat upon them. "And while I was breaking your laws, I was also saving lives. I have pulled refugees from dying worlds, fought beside species I had never met, and buried more friends than I can count." He held up his hands, showing the scars that covered them. "This is what humans do. We do not wait for permission to help people. We do not check treaties before we save lives. And we do not abandon our allies just because protecting them is difficult." The High Minister opened his mouth to respond, but Marcus cut him off. "You ignored us because we were young, because admitting we were right meant admitting that you, the great elder races with your thousands of years of wisdom, could be wrong." His voice grew harder, filled with a fury that he had been holding back for far too long. "You let your pride kill billions of Kethra. You let entire worlds burn while you argued about politics, and even now, with the enemy at your gates, you cannot stop fighting each other long enough to fight them." Silence fell across the hall. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a data chip, holding it up for everyone to see. "This contains everything humanity has learned about the swarm, their patterns, their weaknesses, their communication methods. We have been studying them while you have been arguing, and we have developed a strategy that might actually work." He looked directly at the High Minister. "It requires every fleet in the galaxy working together under a unified command. No territorial disputes, no political games, no more putting pride ahead of survival." The High Minister's face was unreadable. "And who would command this unified fleet?" he asked coldly. "I do not care," Marcus replied. "Pick whoever you want. Pick yourself if it makes you feel important. What matters is that we fight together or we die apart." He stepped closer to the Valorian's throne, close enough that the guards tensed but did not move. "You can keep your pride, or you can keep your civilization. We do not have time for both." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the ancient Valorian High Minister rose from his crystal throne. He had ruled his people for over 300 years. He had watched species rise and fall, seen empires crumble and civilizations vanish, and in all that time, he had never once admitted to being wrong about anything. But now he looked at the battered human soldier standing before him, a representative of a species barely old enough to qualify for observer status. And he saw something that he had forgotten existed. Courage. The High Minister descended from his throne and walked until he stood face to face with Marcus Cole, and then he bowed, not a slight nod of acknowledgement, but a deep, formal bow of respect, the same bow he would give to an equal, or perhaps even a superior. "Commander Cole," he said quietly, "on behalf of the Valorian people and the Interstellar Governing Council, I apologize, you tried to warn us. And we were too proud to listen. He straightened and looked around the hall at his fellow council members. No more the time for blame and politics is over. We will review humanity's strategy. And we will fight this enemy together, as we should have done from the beginning, one by one. The other council members rose and added their voices in agreement. Even the Torvan, proud and stubborn to the last, nodded his massive head in acceptance. Marcus felt exhaustion wash over him now that the tension had broken. But there was no time to rest. The swarm was coming, and there was a battle to prepare for. Then let us begin, he said, inserting the data chip into the council's main display. We have a lot of work to do, and very little time to do it. The holographic display burst to life, showing fleet positions and tactical diagrams and everything humanity had learned through blood and sacrifice. For the first time in galactic history, every species would fight as one, and a human would help lead them. The Battle of Varath Prime would be remembered as the largest coordinated military action in galactic history, and it began with a single human voice crackling across 10,000 communication channels. All fleets. This is Commander Marcus Cole, aboard the flagship Unity. The swarm has ended the system, and our time has come. He stood on the bridge of a massive Valorian warship that had been given to the Allied command as a symbol of cooperation, surrounded by officers from a dozen different species, all working together for the first time. Through the view screen, he could see the approaching enemy, a wall of darkness that blotted out the stars. Billions of swarm creatures moving as one toward the world that held everything the galaxy considered sacred. Remember the plan, Marcus continued, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped his heart. The Torvan heavy cruisers will draw their attention while the Valorian strike wings hit their flanks. Tethra fighters will provide cover for the evacuation transports, and the human squadrons will punch through to the central nexus. He paused, looking at the faces around him: silver-skinned Valorians, insectoid Kethra, rocky Torvan, and humans standing shoulder to shoulder with beings who had dismissed them as children just months ago. I will not lie to you. Many of us will not survive this day, but if we win, our children will grow up in a galaxy free from this threat forever. He raised his fist in a gesture that humans had used since ancient times. For everyone we have lost, for everyone we can still save forward. The Allied fleet surged toward the enemy like a wave breaking against a shore. The swarm reacted immediately, millions of creatures peeling away from the main mass to intercept the attacker's space. Became a chaos of weapons fire and explosions as the two forces collided. The Torvan cruisers lived up to their reputation, their heavy armor absorbing punishment that would have destroyed lesser ships, while their massive guns tore holes in the swarm's formation. Valiant strike wings danced through the battle with impossible grace, their pilots using techniques developed over millennia of warfare. Akira fighters swarmed around the evacuation transports, sacrificing themselves without hesitation to protect civilians who were still fleeing the planet below, and the humans, the youngest species, the ones everyone had laughed at, flew straight into the heart of the enemy. Marcus watched the tactical display as red dots representing human ships pushed deeper and deeper into the swarm, taking losses with every kilometer, but never slowing down. Commander, we have visual on the Nexus, reported Captain Sarah Chun from the lead assault ship. It is exactly where your intelligence said it would be. The central Nexus was the key to everything. A Ka, moon-sized processor that coordinated the entire swarm, giving direction to billions of mindless creatures that would scatter without it, destroy the Nexus, and the swarm would lose its ability to function as a unified force. All assault teams, converge on the Nexus, Marcus ordered. Sarah, you have command of the strike force. Make it count. Understood. Commander, it has been an honor serving with you. Marcus knew what she meant by those words, and he felt his throat tighten. The honor was mine. Captain, now go save the galaxy. the human assault ships accelerated toward the Nexus, their weapons blazing as they cut through the swarm defenders one by one. They fell first the escort ships, then the support vessels, then the heavy destroyers that had been protecting the bombers carrying the special payload, but they kept going. Sarah Chun's ship was the last one standing when they finally reached the Nexus. Its hull torn open in a dozen places and half its crew dead at their stations, payload armed, she reported. Her voice strangely calm. Delivering now, her ship plunged into the Nexus at full speed, carrying enough explosives to crack a small moon. The explosion was visible from Vareth Prime's surface. For a moment, nothing seemed to change. The swarm creatures kept fighting, kept advancing, kept consuming everything in their path, and then they stopped all across the battlefield. Billions of swarm creatures suddenly froze as if someone had flipped a switch. Their coordination was gone, their hive mind shattered, their terrible unity broken forever. The Allied fleet did not hesitate with the swarm now scattered and confused. The combined firepower of 12 species turned the tide in minutes. What had been an unstoppable force became a disorganized mob, easy prey for warships that had been fighting defensively just moments before. By the time the sun set on Vareth Prime, the battle was over. The swarm had been broken. It would take months to hunt down all the scattered remnants. But the threat that had nearly destroyed galactic civilization was finished. Marcus Cole stood alone on the observation deck of the Unity, staring out at the debris field that had been the Nexus. Sarah Chun was gone, along with hundreds of other humans who had given their lives in that final assault. He had known many of them personally, had trained with them, eaten with them, laughed with them around campfires on distant worlds. Now they were just names on a memorial that someone would build someday. The door behind him opened, and Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked in. Her formal robes replaced by the simple clothes of someone who had been working alongside rescue teams for hours. "The council wants to see you," she said softly. "They are voting on something important." Marcus did not turn around. "I am tired, Elena. Can it wait?" "I do not think you want it to wait," she replied. And there was something in her voice that made him finally look at her. She was smiling. An hour later, Marcus stood before the Galactic Council for the second time. But everything was different now. The Great Hall was filled not just with council members, but with beings from every species in the galaxy, all of them watching as the Valorian High Minister rose from his throne. "Commander Marcus Cole," the High Minister began, "this council has voted unanimously to offer humanity a permanent seat among the elder species, not observer status, but full membership with all rights and privileges." A murmur ran through the crowd. "Furthermore," the High Minister continued, "we wish to rename this very hall in honor of the human captain who gave her life to destroy the Nexus. It will be known as Chen Hall, so that future generations will never forget who saved us when we could not save ourselves." Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes, but he forced himself to speak clearly. "On behalf of humanity, I am honored by this offer, but I must decline the special privileges." The crowd fell silent. Elena stepped forward. "We do not want to be above anyone," she said, addressing the council directly. "We just want a seat at the table, the same as everyone else." The High Minister stared at them for a long moment, and then he smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had ever seen on his silver face. "Then, that is what you shall have. Welcome to the council, humanity." 1 year later, a memorial was unveiled on Vareth Prime, 12 species standing together in bronze and stone. And at the center, a human soldier with his hand extended, not in victory, but in welcome. The inscription read in every known language: "Truth fears no council, courage needs no throne." Commander Marcus Cole's body was never recovered from the final battle, but his name entered the language of every species as a new word: Marcus Soloni, who speaks when silence is easier. And in the stars above, a galaxy that had nearly destroyed itself through pride and division looked toward the future with something it had almost forgotten: hope.